The HOA president stood right on my dock, clipboard clutched like a weapon, ordering me to tear it down within 48 hours, completely oblivious to the fact that I legally owned every inch of the lake she was glaring at. Picture this, it's 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. I'm drinking my morning coffee on the dock I built myself, watching wisps of mist drift over the water like soft smoke. The wood creaks under my feet, honest craftsmanship that's weathered to brutal winters. Then comes the sound, sharp, impatient clicks of high heels against my planks. Here she comes, Brenda Thornfield, charging toward me like she's storming her personal kingdom. This eyesore is tanking our property values, she snaps, thrusting a stack of papers in my face. You've got 48 hours to remove it, or we'll take your house. Default. Suddenly, my coffee tastes bitter. The cool pine-scented air feels heavy. That dock wasn't just wood and bolts, it was the last project my late wife, Sarah, and I planned together before cancer stole her away. Ma'am, I tell her quietly, you might want to recheck your property lines. She had no idea. Not only did I own the dock legally and entirely, but I owned the entire lake system beneath it. So tell me, what would you do if some HOA Karen tried to erase your dead wife's final dream? Drop your wildest HOA horror story in the comments. And let me know, where are you watching from? Because this one's unbelievable. Let me rewind a bit. My name's Garrett Morrison. 2 years ago, I thought I was buying peace, a quiet lakeside retreat to patch up a shattered heart. Instead, I ended up in an all-out war with the neighborhood queen bee. I'm 58, newly retired after 3 decades designing bridges that stay standing and water systems that actually function. 3 years back, cancer took my wife, Sarah, my partner of 32 years, in just 18 months. During chemo, we'd daydream about the lake house we'd retire to, sketching dock plans between treatments. Before she passed, she made me promise to finish it. You're too stubborn to let some lake beat you, she'd said during one of her last good days. I kept that promise. I moved to Millbrook Lake Estates, a postcard perfect community of 47 homes circling a pristine, 200-acre lake. Property values range from $400,000 to $800,000. Retired teachers, small business owners, doctors, the kind of neighborhood where people still wave instead of filing complaints. Building that dock saved me 6 months of focused work, every permit secured, every bolt tightened to spec. The county inspector even called it engineering turned art. Sarah would have adored the view, the sunlight spilling across those hand-sanded cedar planks, smooth as silk under bare feet. Then came the Thornfield takeover. Picture a real estate headshot come to life and running your HOA. That's Brenda. 52. Blonde highlights that probably cost more than my groceries for the month, and a smile that screams community spirit while your wallet quietly disappears. She and her husband, Rick, owner of Thornfield Construction, purveyors of glossy mediocrity, moved in 3 years ago. Together, they're a one-couple gentrification machine. Within 8 months, Brenda sweet-talked her way into the HOA presidency. The old board, mostly folks in their 70s who believed adults didn't need babysitting, resigned rather than deal with her. USAID for Community Excellence, her first initiative. Waterfront structure standardization to enhance property values. Translation: everyone's dock must look identical and must be built by, you guessed it, Thornfield Construction. I showed her my documentation, permits, engineering plans, county approvals, all legitimate, all airtight. She squinted at them like they were doodles in crayon. Permits don't override community standards, Mr. Morrison, she said. Standing in my driveway with her clipboard of doom, the morning sun flashed off her oversized diamond ring as she gestured toward my handiwork. This industrial monstrosity ruins our aesthetic harmony. Industrial monstrosity. My dock, handcrafted cedar, brass fittings, shaped to follow the shoreline's natural curve as if it had grown there. But Brenda preferred her husband's plastic floating platforms, triple the price, half the quality. And, not coincidentally, already installed at half the homes on the lake, the violation notice fluttered in the lake breeze, its corners brushing against the air thick with her department store perfume and the diesel fumes from Rick's overcompensating pickup truck. $500 per day in fines if I didn't remove the non-compliant structure within 72 hours. And they'd slap a lien on my house for good measure. Emergency community protection powers, she announced, sounding like a TV cop who'd memorized the wrong script. I just stood there, boots grinding into the gravel, staring at this woman who was threatening to destroy the one place still connecting me to my wife's memory, the dock where I spoke to Sarah's ghost every morning, where I'd scattered part of her ashes on our anniversary. Ma'am, I said quietly, you might want to double-check your authority on that. That evening, I sat on my so-called illegal dock, listening to the water lap gently against the posts, like applause from ghosts. A lone loon cried out across the lake, a wild, hollow call that slices through suburban pretense like truth through noise. I could almost hear Sarah's voice in my head, her favorite saying echoing back, when bullies mess with engineers, they usually regret it. She wasn't wrong. Time to take that advice to heart. Tomorrow, I'd pay the county records office a visit and find out exactly what I'd bought. The next morning, I rolled into the county assessor's office, coffee still steaming in hand. My engineer's brain firing on all cylinders. If there's one thing 3 decades of designing infrastructure teaches you, it's this: when someone says you can't do something, check the plans first, argue later. Behind the counter sat Dolores Martinez, the queen of county records. She'd been there since the Reagan years, sharp as a tack and with a memory like a steel trap. She could recall every bizarre property case, every family boundary feud, every who really owns that mystery the county ever handled. When I explained Brenda's dock ultimatum, her face lit up like it was Christmas morning. Riparian rights, she whispered, reaching for a magnifying glass. Haven't seen those in years. Back in college, one of my old engineering professors used to joke that water rights were the Wild West of property law. Most people assume owning lakefront means you own up to the water's edge and that's it. But some old deeds include something called riparian rights. In plain terms, it means you don't just own the land, you have legal access to the water itself for docks, boats, swimming, whatever. I'd always thought it sounded too good to be true. Turns out, my deed carried those exact words: riparian rights extending to the high water mark. This is fascinating, Dolores said, adjusting her thick glasses. Mind if I dig a little deeper? I do love a good mystery. 20 minutes later, she emerged from the back room looking like she'd struck gold. There carried that musty scent of century-old paper as she laid a stack of documents on the counter. Mr. Morrison, she said, fanning out the papers, your property has quite the history. And that's when things got wild. I hadn't just inherited a lakeside cabin from some distant relative. I'd inherited water rights dating back to 1923, when my great-uncle, Theodore Morrison, convinced the county to let him dam the natural creek that became this very lake. Theodore, it turned out, had been a flood control engineer who sold the county on a plan to prevent downstream flooding while creating a local fishing haven. Clever man. In the original agreement, he retained perpetual water management authority. Driving home, the gravel crunched under my tires as my brain tried to absorb what I'd just learned. Brenda hadn't merely overstepped, she had zero legal power over anything I did with that lake. The irony was so thick you could slice it with a propeller blade. That evening, I showed up at Brenda's emergency board meeting. The community center reeked of industrial carpet cleaner and burnt coffee from a machine that probably hadn't seen soap since the Clinton years. About 15 neighbors trickled in, all looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Brenda had gone all out, a PowerPoint presentation titled Protecting Our Investment, the Dock Crisis. She'd even dragged along her brother-in-law, a slick attorney in a $1,000 suit who kept glancing at his Rolex like every second was billable. This non-compliant structure endangers our property values, Brenda announced, flipping through slides of dilapidated docks from who knows where to prove her point. We must act decisively to preserve community standards. The lawyer nodded solemnly. The HOA has clear authority under community covenants to regulate all waterfront structures. That's when I stood up. Calmly, I reached into my folder, pulled out the copies Dolores had made for me, and laid them neatly on the table. Actually, I said, voice steady, you might want to take a look at these before you keep talking. And just like that, I dropped my legal bomb. According to the county records, I began laying the papers flat on the table. My property includes water management authority dating back to the original creation of this lake. That means the HOA has absolutely no jurisdiction over any of my water-related activities. The room went dead silent except for the angry hum of the fluorescent lights above, buzzing like hornets. The lawyer's confident smirk melted faster than ice cream in July. That's impossible, Brenda stammered, her face flushing scarlet. Those records must be ancient. Community covenants override individual rights. Before I could reply, Margaret Morgan, a retired real estate attorney from down on Lakeshore Drive, cleared her throat. Actually, she said, calm as a judge, riparian rights almost always predate HOA formation. They remain enforceable regardless of later community agreements. You could practically hear Brenda's blood pressure rising. This is absurd, she shouted. One selfish homeowner cannot hold our entire neighborhood hostage. Ma'am, I said evenly, I'm not holding anyone hostage. I'm simply exercising the same property rights you'd fight to defend if they were yours. The meeting dissolved into murmurs and uneasy side glances. A few board members even apologized for the rushed violation notice. But Brenda, she went full nuclear. We're hiring a real attorney to challenge these forged papers, she announced dramatically. This community will not be bullied by outdated technicalities. As I walked toward my truck afterward, Margaret appeared beside me like some kind of guardian angel. Garrett, she said softly, I helped research this HOAs formation 15 years ago. And if I remember correctly, their paperwork might have some serious flaws. Driving home under sky full of stars, I realized this was far from over. 3 days later, Brenda launched her counterattack with all the grace of a freight train plowing through fine china. She called an emergency meeting for Saturday morning, complete with glossy printed flyers that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. The headline screamed, protecting Millbrook Lake from legal manipulation and property value destruction. You had to hand it to her, she never did anything halfway. The community center was packed tighter than a subway car at rush hour. Brenda had transformed the place into her personal courtroom, complete with a projector, a slideshow, and her brother-in-law, the lawyer, sitting behind a folding table like he was presiding over the Spanish Inquisition. The room reeked of burnt coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. Ladies and gentlemen, Brenda began, clicking through slides of rusty, collapsing docs from who knows where, we face an unprecedented threat to our community's stability. One homeowner is using fabricated documents to undermine legitimate HOA authority. Fabricated documents. That one made my blood simmer. I've dealt with plenty of construction disputes in my life, but accusing an engineer of falsifying records, those were fighting words. Her brother-in-law, Mr. Expensive Suit, nodded gravely. These so-called riparian rights are clearly outdated legal relics, he said, and have no relevance under modern community governance. The HOA maintains full regulatory power over all waterfront structures. That's when it hit me. Brenda had made a serious mistake. She was so busy attacking my integrity that she hadn't actually taken the time to understand the law. The next morning, armed with strong coffee and growing admiration for my great-uncle Theodore's cleverness, I headed back to Dolores's desk at the county office. I need everything you've got on how this lake was created, I told her. Maps, contracts, engineering plans, whatever exists. Dolores disappeared into the archives like a woman on a mission. Nearly an hour later, she emerged, clutching a stack of folders thick enough to stop a door and grinning like she'd just solved a censure. Wild mystery. Your great-uncle Theodore, she said, laying out yellowed maps across the counter, wasn't just building a dam, he was solving the county's entire flood problem. The documents told an incredible story. Back in 1923, spring floods regularly destroyed 3 neighboring townships. Theodore, being a flood control engineer, came up with an ambitious plan: dam Millbrook Creek, create a retention lake system, and design overflow channels to manage seasonal surges. The county, desperate for flood prevention, gave him almost complete control. His agreement granted permanent water management rights over all tributaries and waterways inside township boundaries. It was such a sweeping deal. It made my head spin. Theodore hadn't just created the lake, he legally controlled every creek, stream, and drainage ditch feeding the entire watershed. But Dolores wasn't done. Her eyes twinkled as she leaned in with a grin. "Wait until you hear the best part," she said. "There's more." Dolores opened a series of old ledgers, their pages yellowed and edges curled with age. Inside were records of county payments, annual water management fees that had been faithfully deposited into a trust account for decades. Money I hadn't even known existed. The current balance, including accumulated interest, sat at $847,000. I stared at the figure, my coffee cooling in my hands. Brenda was threatening to fine me $500 a day while I was sitting on rights worth nearly $1 million. That evening, Margaret Morgan showed up at my kitchen table armed like a legal soldier, reading glasses, yellow notepads, and the sharp grin of an attorney who smells blood in the water. "This is extraordinary," she murmured, studying Theodore's contracts under the soft glow of my kitchen lamp. "Your great-uncle essentially operated as a private utility company. These rights don't just override HOA authority, they override almost everything." "Margaret," I asked, watching her jot furious notes. "What happens if an HOA has been operating outside its legal limits?" She looked up with a spark in her eye, the look of someone who's just uncovered a deliciously complex puzzle. "Well," she said, tapping her pen against the table, "if they've been charging fees for water access, they don't actually control or issuing permits. They have no legal right to issue then." She trailed off, scribbling figures. "We need to review their incorporation paperwork immediately. If they formed this HOA without researching pre-existing water rights, their entire foundation could collapse like a house built on quicksand." The following evening, Brenda hosted what she called a community unity meeting, her attempt to rally the neighborhood after loss. 2 weeks legal bombshell. This time, I came prepared. When she opened the floor for questions, I stood up, holding a manila folder filled with Theodore's original water management agreements. "Mrs. Thornfield," I said casually, "before we discuss dock regulations, I'm just curious, did the HOA ever obtain water rights approval when it was incorporated 15 years ago?" Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Brenda's confident smile flickered and died. "That's irrelevant," she sputtered. "We're talking about community standards here." "Actually," I continued, "since the HOA has been collecting water access fees from homeowners, I assume you have documentation proving legal control of those rights." Her brother-in-law, the resident lawyer, suddenly found something very fascinating inside his briefcase. A few board members exchanged uneasy looks. "This meeting isn't about your fabricated paperwork," Brenda snapped, her composure cracking like thin ice. "Ma'am," I said evenly, "these documents are recorded with the county and backed by 90 years of legal precedent. Would you like to see the payment ledgers?" Walking home beneath a sky full of stars, I realized Brenda had just made her second critical mistake. She'd challenged an engineer to a documentation battle. Her next move was so predictably spiteful, I almost admired her dedication to being awful. 2 days after the meeting, after I'd publicly embarrassed her, I woke to the sound of splintering wood and my neighbor, Jake Morrison, pounding on my front door at 6:30 a.m. Through the kitchen window, I saw what used to be my dock. Now it looked like a beaver the size of a minivan had gone berserk. "Garrett," Jake shouted, still in his bathrobe and slippers, "you gotta see this mess." Out on the water, Rick Thornfield's boat bobbed innocently about 50 yards offshore, its motor idling like a smud cat. Rick stood at the helm wearing an expression that screamed "Who me?" louder than a foghorn. The section of dock where Sarah and I had planned to place her memorial bench lay shattered, splintered wood floating like broken memories. "Mechanical failure," Rick yelled across the lake, waving his arms, throttle stuck in forward gear. "Real sorry about the damage, pal. I'll help you clean up." "Sure, Rick," I muttered. "And I suppose the Easter Bunny took your boat for a joyride." Barefoot, I walked down to inspect the wreckage, wincing as splinters bit into my feet like punishment. The stench hit me, diesel fuel mixing with lake water. 30 years of engineering pride reduced to floating debris. Of all the possible spots he could have accidentally hit, Rick had managed to obliterate the one corner that meant the most to me. In engineering school, they taught us to recognize patterns. When someone threatens your property on Monday and accidentally destroys it on Wednesday, that's not a malfunction. That's premeditated stupidity. But here's the beautiful thing about being an engineer. We document everything. While Rick was probably high-fiving Brenda over their brilliant act of sabotage, I was already installing security cameras and calling in a few professional favors built over 30 years in the field. That afternoon, while I was repairing the damaged section of the dock with boards that smelled of pine and fresh resolve, Margaret called with news that made Rick's little boating accident seem like a parking violation. "I've been digging through the HOAs and corporation records," she said, her tone alive with the excitement of a lawyer who's struck legal gold. "Garrett, they never conducted the mandatory water rights review when they were formed. State law clearly requires any waterfront HOA to verify existing riparian rights before claiming authority over the water." I froze mid-swing, hammer suspended above a half-driven nail. "English, please," I said. "In plain terms," she clarified, "this HOA has been operating illegally for 15 years. Every fee they've charged, every fine they've imposed, every waterfront regulation they've enforced, it's all invalid. They're basically like a restaurant running without a health permit, only instead of bad food, they've been serving bad legal advice." As Margaret went over the finer points of HOA law, I caught the familiar rumble of an engine in the distance. Rick's boat was doing another slow pass, this time chauffeuring Brenda like she was Cleopatra inspecting her domain. They drifted close enough for me to catch the clash of her department store perfume with Rick's diesel exhaust ascent. "War no one asked for." "Doc's looking great, Morrison," Rick called out with the exaggerated cheer of a used car salesman. "Real shame about that throttle issue. Can't trust these old engines, you know." Brenda sat beside him like a department store mannequin designer, sunglasses, perfect posture, and an expression sharp enough to cut glass. She didn't speak, just watched my repairs with the silent calculation of a general planning her next offensive. That evening, my insurance company rang. Rick had already filed his version of events, a creative masterpiece describing his heroic attempt to avoid collision despite a catastrophic throttle malfunction. And his performance was so well rehearsed it deserved a community theater award. But Rick and Brenda had made a fatal miscalculation. They thought they were dealing with a grieving widower who'd fold under pressure. No one had told them that provoking an engineer is like poking a sleeping dragon with a sharpened stick. By Thursday night, I had a plan. I made 3 calls, first to Tom Rodriguez, a marine mechanic who owed me a favor from a bridge inspection gig. Second to Detective Collins from County Water Patrol. And third to Patricia Valdez, a water rights attorney known for making HOA bullies cry in court. Maritime sabotage. Patricia laughed when I explained, "That's a new one for me. But if you can prove deliberate damage to property protected under federal water rights, we're talking major criminal charges." Friday morning, my personal Justice League assembled. The insurance adjuster, Detective Collins, Tom with his toolbox, and me with enough paperwork to bury a bureaucrat. While they examined the wreckage, I queued up the security footage that was about to ruin Rick's day. Tom's verdict was pure poetry. "This throttle's been tampered with," he announced, pointing at fresh tool marks. "Someone rigged it to jam in forward gear. This wasn't mechanical failure, it was premeditated maritime stupidity." Detective Collins took careful photos and scribbled in his notebook. "Mr. Morrison," he said evenly, "based on this evidence, we'll be filing charges for criminal mischief, insurance fraud, and destruction of historically protected property." That afternoon, Rick got an unexpected visit from 2 county deputies complete with handcuffs and grim expressions. By sunset, the neighborhood buzzed like a disturbed hornet's nest. And Brenda learned the hard way that being married to a felon wasn't the community leadership image she'd been going for. That weekend, while Rick was adjusting to the fact that orange jumpsuits didn't complement his skin tone, Margaret and I turned my kitchen table into mission control. We were about to uncover the most shocking family secret since someone discovered their grandfather had been a Prohibition bootlegger. "Sweet Jesus on a bicycle," Margaret breathed, nearly losing her glasses as she opened a folder stamped Morrison Water Trust of confidential county records. The papers inside smelled faintly of dust, ink, and old authority, the scent of documents that had quietly shaped history while everyone else was watching TV. What we found didn't just change my situation, it upended the entire game. Theodore Morrison, my eccentric great-uncle I barely remembered from childhood reunions, hadn't just built a pleasant fishing lake. He had engineered himself into becoming an official water baron of half the county. The original 1923 agreement was a work of legal genius. When the county begged him to fix their catastrophic flooding problem, he hadn't merely constructed one dam. He'd designed an integrated water management network spanning 3 townships. In return, the county granted him exclusive authority over all water distribution within the watershed boundaries. Translation: I didn't just own the lake. I controlled the water supply for 15,000 people. Look at this ledger, Margaret said, her voice cracking with disbelief as she spread out the yellowed pages. The county's been depositing annual water management fees into a trust account since 1950, and the current balance. She let the tension hang for a moment before sliding the bank statement across the table. $847,000 plus 70 years of accumulated interest. I almost spat out my coffee. You're telling me this money has been sitting there all this time? Margaret smirked. Classic bureaucratic shell game. The county assumed Theodore's estate lawyers were managing the trust, while the lawyers assumed the county handled operations. Everyone followed procedure. But when Theodore passed, no one connected the dots. Then she dropped the real bombshell, buried deep within the 2009 Millbrook Lake Estates development files. The construction company had simply assumed the lake was standard county-managed water. They never investigated existing water rights, never looked into historic agreements, never realized their entire waterfront community sat on privately controlled water. This HOA, Margaret said, tapping her pen against the mountain of paperwork, has been acting like it owns water rights it never had. Every dock permit, every boating rule, every excess fee they've charged, all legally worthless. I sat there, stunned by the scope of what I'd inherited. I wasn't just the owner of a lake. I held complete jurisdiction over Millbrook Lake and its tributaries, authority over 3 creeks feeding neighboring communities, oversight of the county's eastern stormwater systems, and even control over the municipal intake points. I had final approval for any construction affecting watershed zones. In short, I held more water authority than some small cities. Margaret wasn't done. And here's the best part, she said, pulling another document from her folder of the HOA's insurance policy. If they've been operating without verified water rights, their entire insurance coverage could be null and void. All those inflated construction contracts Rick pushed through, the community could demand every penny back. My engineer's mind started racing, calculating chain reactions and legal implications. Brenda hadn't just been illegally targeting me, as she'd been running a fraudulent operation, collecting hundreds of thousands in fees for privileges the HOA had no legal right to grant. Margaret, I said slowly, staring at the papers that effectively made me a private utility owner, what would happen if I fully exercised these rights? Her expression sharpened, that gleam only a lawyer gets when spotting the legal equivalent of a jackpot. You'd have the authority to restrict boating, control water levels, halt waterfront construction, oversee environmental reviews, even regulate municipal supply operations. Technically, she said with a wry smile, you could shut down half the county's water systems before breakfast. I laughed, though uneasily, because with that much power came the crushing awareness that one wrong move could affect thousands of lives. The question wasn't whether I could destroy Brenda's little HOA empire, it was whether I had the restraint to use that power wisely. By Monday morning, I did what any sane person would do after accidentally inheriting enough water rights to terrify a county government. I built a legal dream team. My first call was to Patricia Valdez, the water rights attorney Margaret had mentioned, a woman whose reputation made bureaucrats lose sleep. Patricia arrived Tuesday afternoon, gliding up my driveway in a Tesla that hummed with quiet authority. She carried a briefcase that probably cost more than Rick's boat and had the presence of someone who negotiates peace treaties before lunch and dismantles corrupt councils by dinner. "Mr. Morrison," she said, settling at my kitchen table, scanning Theodore's old contracts like she was speed reading for the bar exam. "In 30 years of practicing water law, I've never seen private rights this airtight. You don't just own the lake, you own the plumbing for half the county." Next came Dr. Lisa Morgan, an environmental engineer specializing in watershed management, as someone who spoke the same technical language as me. She arrived with enough monitoring gear to outfit a small NASA mission and the calm precision of a scientist who knows exactly what she's doing. "This is incredible," she said, examining Theodore's hand-drawn system maps as her laptop displayed modern data overlays. "Your great-uncle didn't just build a dam. He created a flood prevention network that's still saving millions in property damage every year. This isn't just about fighting an HOA. This is about safeguarding an entire ecosystem." Margaret handled the legal offense, wielding her experience and a contact list full of people who made mayors nervous. Jake offered his construction know-how and served as our undercover source inside the HOA ranks. Plus, he brewed coffee strong enough to wake Theodore himself. But our secret weapon was Dolores, the quiet record clerk who'd been watching this administrative circus unfold for 15 years from behind the county files. "Sweetheart," Dolores said, fanning the paperwork across my table like a blackjack dealer at the dullest casino in existence. "I've been waiting years for someone to call out this HOA's make-believe water rights empire. They've been charging homeowners for authority they never actually had. And where I come from, that's called fraud. Plain and simple." Our first strategy session felt less like a legal meeting and more like planning a heist. If the loot were buried under mountains of bureaucracy instead of locked in a vault. The air smelled of Jake's turbocharged coffee and the faint vanilla of century-old parchment. While we plotted Brenda's inevitable legal downfall, Patricia laid out our version of the nuclear option. "Garrett," she began, her tone equal parts professor and general, "your water rights don't just outrank the HOA, they outrank almost everything. Federal environmental law, state utility regulations, local ordinances, they all defer to historical water management agreements. But here's the catch they never mention in the homeowner handbooks. When you inherit property with legacy utility rights, you also inherit what's called successor liability. Meaning, you're now responsible for maintaining infrastructure entire communities rely on. Think of it as inheriting your grandpa's house and discovering the basement powers half the city." Dr. Morgan's environmental report was both reassuring and horrifying. "Theodore's engineering is still solid," she said, "but the dam system needs about $2.3 million in upgrades within 5 years. The county, blissfully unaware it didn't even own the infrastructure, had budgeted a mere $400,000. The irony, my trust fund, swollen from decades of county deposits, could nearly cover the entire cost. Meanwhile, Jake's insider intel painted a grim picture of HOA corruption. Brenda's been using Rick's construction company like her own ATM, he said. No bids, no oversight, no inspections. The community center's wiring, according to him, was one power surge away from spontaneous combustion. As we dug deeper, the paper trail grew uglier. Fake contracts, added invoices, and homeowners billed for maintenance on assets the HOA didn't even control. Rick had been charging luxury rates for discount work, while Brenda provided political cover. Then Margaret uncovered the crown jewel of their scams: homeowners paying lake access fees at property closings, thousands of dollars funneled straight into the HOA's accounts. "They've been selling dock rights they don't own," she said. Incredulous, "It's like charging admission to a museum that already belongs to the visitors." That's when Patricia unveiled the most brilliant part of our plan. "We don't hit them with brute force," she explained, eyes gleaming. "We show restraint. You've got the legal power to shut them down overnight. But instead, we'll offer to fix what their incompetence broke. That makes you the adult in the room and Brenda the tyrant with a clipboard." Our three-phase strategy was simple, elegant, and devastatingly effective. Phase 1: establish my authority publicly and officially. Phase 2: offer cooperative solutions that benefit the community. Phase 3: let Brenda implode. Under the pressure of someone she can't intimidate, Dr. Morgan would perform a full watershed health analysis, demonstrating how proper management could boost both property values and environmental quality. Margaret would host community workshops exposing the difference between actual property rights and the HOA as self-serving myths. Patricia would file the ironclad legal documentation cementing my water authority beyond challenge. Jake, sipping his coffee with a grin that could only mean trouble, summed it up best. When Brenda figures out she's been legally checkmated, the meltdown's gonna be one for the ages. Time she learns the difference between leadership and bullying people with paperwork. He wasn't wrong. 2 days later, proof arrived in the form of a certified letter thick enough to stop a bullet, delivered by a process server who looked like he spent nights bouncing people out of nightclubs. The return address read Sterling and Associates, one of those high-end law firms where the hourly billing rate could bankroll a small country's defense budget. The letter itself was a masterclass in polished intimidation, a symphony of legal jargon wrapped around baseless threats. They accused me of systematic document fabrication, conspiracy to defraud community assets, and my personal favorite, exploiting grief-induced psychological instability to undermine legitimate governance. I had to hand it to them. If self-righteous desperation were an Olympic sport, Brenda would have taken home the gold. Apparently, losing Sarah had scrambled my head so thoroughly that I supposedly couldn't tell legitimate property rights from elaborate fantasies. Who knew bereavement automatically came with legal incompetence? According to them, I owed immediate dock removal, $47,000 in back fines and legal fees, and a public apology for destabilizing the community with my fraudulent claims. The ultimatum: comply within 72 hours or face federal fraud charges. I was still marveling at their inventive legal theories when Patricia called, laughing like someone who'd just hit the jackpot and discovered their ex got audited the same morning. Garrett, she wheezed between giggles, their lead attorney just rang me, wanting to discuss reasonable settlement terms before even looking at your paperwork. The moment I mentioned federal water rights and 90 years of county payments, he went completely silent for half a minute. Then he asked if we'd take a nuisance settlement to avoid expensive litigation. But Brenda wasn't done. That same afternoon she launched a full-scale social media offensive that would have impressed a veteran political operative. Facebook tirades, neighborhood app manifestos, and even a glossy, professionally lit YouTube video filmed in her kitchen, lighting equipment probably worth more than my truck. Fellow residents, she said to her phone camera with the fake sincerity of a practiced telemarketer, we're facing an unprecedented threat from someone exploiting personal tragedy to steal our community-wise assets. This man is clearly suffering grief-related mental health problems, and we must protect ourselves from those who would manipulate our compassion. Jake started forwarding me screenshots from the neighborhood Facebook group where her fans were spinning increasingly absurd conspiracy theories. One claimed I was part of an organized crime ring specializing in HOA takeovers. Another insisted Patricia was my lover and we were orchestrating some elaborate insurance scam. It was entertaining, but Brenda had made a fatal misstep. She forgot some neighbors still had functioning critical thinking skills. Meanwhile, Margaret's quiet property rights education meetings had been gathering steam underground like a subway line. Her informal coffee chats had grown into standing room-only events as homeowners learned just how little actual authority HOA letters possess versus the power they pretend to wield. Then came the twist that changed everything. Dr. Morgan's official watershed report arrived bearing the full bureaucratic clout of county engineering letterhead. It documented that Theodore's flood control system had prevented an estimated $47 million in downstream damage over 9 decades and that my great-uncle's engineering was still protecting thousands of homes every spring. The county engineer's office, finally realizing who actually managed their critical infrastructure, sent me a formal letter recognizing my inherited water management authority and requesting a meeting to plan joint maintenance. That's when Brenda committed her second catastrophic error. She contacted the state environmental agency, accusing me of illegally manipulating public water systems for personal gain. The inspector who showed up Friday morning was Sarah Delgado, a woman who looked like Mother Nature herself had trained her to annihilate anyone wasting her time. She spent 4 hours inspecting Theodore's dam system, reviewing maintenance logs, and testing water quality with equipment likely worth more than my house. Her verdict was pure poetry. "This is the finest privately managed water system I've inspected in 20 years. Whoever maintains this deserves recognition, not investigation." When Inspector Delgado realized Brenda had filed a bogus emergency complaint, her expression could have flashed frozen hell. "Ma'am," she said to Brenda in the deadly calm of someone explaining federal crimes, "filing false environmental emergencies carries serious penalties. Our legal department will be contacting you." Not to be outdone, Rick, already facing criminal charges for dock sabotage, decided to add his own special genius. He organized a neighborhood safety patrol to monitor my property for suspicious activity. The operation was so amateur it belonged on a sitcom, cars parked in my driveway snapping photos, tailing me to the hardware store like bargained-in private investigators, and carefully documenting my suspicious habit of drinking coffee on my own dock. Even my mail carrier started commenting on the amateur spy camp staked outside my house. But while Rick's crew was busy watching me, they completely missed Patricia's process server hand-delivering harassment restraining orders to their own front doors. By Sunday, Brenda's legal strategy was imploding faster than Rick's construction reputation, and the final confrontation was no longer avoidable. By Monday morning, Brenda had officially leveled up from neighborhood menace to full-fledged domestic terrorist. Albeit one armed with a real estate license instead of explosives, her newest master plan: filing an emergency petition claiming my dam posed an imminent catastrophic threat, and demanding the county seize it under eminent domain. Apparently, when intimidation failed, she decided to outsource her theft to the government. The county engineer who showed up Tuesday morning looked like he'd rather be performing dental surgery on an angry Wolverine. His name was Tom Hendricks, a veteran of municipal infrastructure since the Carter era, and his face carried the expression of a man who'd just received a phone call destined to ruin his week. "Mr. Morrison," he began, surveying Theodore's dam with the admiration of someone who knows true craftsmanship when he sees it, "I've reviewed Mrs. Thornfield's emergency claim. She alleges this 90-year-old structure is deteriorating rapidly and poses an immediate flood risk to downstream residents." He paused, running a calloused hand along the dam's surface like he was petting a well-trained Labrador. "Son," he said finally, "this is some of the finest flood control engineering I've seen in 40 years. Your great-uncle built something that still outperforms most modern systems." Tom's inspection took for meticulous hours. He examined every bolt, valve, and drainage channel with the precision of a man whose findings could determine whether Brenda ended up facing federal charge. As for filing a fraudulent emergency report, his written conclusion was bureaucratic poetry. "This infrastructure exceeds all current safety standards and appears to be maintained to museum-grade specifications." But Brenda wasn't satisfied with wasting one agency's time. She decided to go national. That afternoon, she launched what could only be described as a bureaucratic carpet-bombing campaign: simultaneous complaints to the EPA, the Army Corps of Engineers, the State Water Authority, the County Health Department, and even the Department of Homeland Security. Her accusations that I was running an unlicensed industrial water operation posing a regional security threat. By the end of the week, my property looked like the site of a federal field trip. Inspectors from half a dozen agencies trudged around with clipboards, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. Each one had arrived expecting to find an ecological disaster on par with Chernobyl and instead discovered Theodore's immaculate, precisely maintained system. The maintenance logs read like love letters to engineering discipline, and the water quality data made municipal treatment plants look like kiddie pools. The EPA inspector, visibly impressed, actually asked permission to use Theodore's design in her department's training materials. "This," she said, snapping photos of the overflow system, "is textbook watershed management. Whoever built this new hydrology better than most of our current contractors," while Brenda was busy drowning herself in fraudulent paperwork. Rick decided to contribute his own unique brand of idiocy to the family's growing list of legal disasters. On Wednesday night, my security cameras captured him and two of his construction buddies sneaking around the dam with bolt cutters, apparently believing Sabotage would make Brenda's fake emergency reports look legitimate. Their operation was such a masterpiece of stupidity that the footage could have doubled as a tutorial titled HOA not to commit infrastructure terrorism. Rick was clearly cutting crucial flood control cables, while his so-called accomplices provided lookout duty with all the competence of hungover mall cops. I called Detective Collins at sunrise Thursday. She arrived with backup and the kind of expression that promised Rick's morning was about to go downhill fast. "Mr. Morrison," she said after watching the footage, "this isn't vandalism. Tampering with flood control infrastructure during spring runoff season is classified as domestic terrorism. Minimum 20 years, no parole." Rick's arrest turned into an impromptu neighborhood spectacle, less like a block party and more like a federal sting operation. Instead of lawn chairs and barbecue, there were handcuffs, flashing lights, and a very quiet crowd watching karma in high definition. Even Brenda's amateur surveillance crew suddenly discovered urgent errands the moment the FBI's terrorism task force rolled in. But Brenda's reaction to her husband's arrest proved one thing beyond doubt: some people can't recognize rock bottom, even when it smacks them across the face wearing a federal indictment. Brenda didn't just hold a neighborhood meeting, she staged a full-blown press conference in her driveway, complete with a wobbly podium, printed statements, and enough libelous material to keep attorneys busy for weeks. The morning breeze carried a strange mix of luxury perfume and pure desperation as she faced the cameras, her remaining supporters, and a growing crowd of neighbors who'd shown up mostly for the spectacle. "My husband is the victim of an elaborate conspiracy," she declared dramatically, unaware she was about to stir in the county's most watched YouTube clip of the year. "This Morrison individual has manipulated public officials, forged historical records, and masterminded a criminal scheme to steal our community's water assets." When a reporter asked her for proof of these so-called fabrications, Brenda's confident smile began to tremble like a house built on quicksand. "The evidence," she insisted, "is being hidden by corrupt federal agents who are part of the conspiracy." She apparently didn't realize that accusing the FBI of participating in a criminal plot on live television isn't generally considered a sound legal strategy. That evening's news broadcasts were a masterpiece of irony, Brenda claiming the federal government was helping me steal water, while her husband remained in federal custody on terrorism charges. The final showdown was inevitable. By Thursday night, the town council meeting had transformed into the social event of the decade, a standing room only, packed with reporters, residents, and the merely curious. Word of the Millbrook Lake War had spread across 3 counties. The community center buzzed with anticipation. Cameras from every local TV outlet lined the back wall, and even amateur YouTubers were live streaming what they hoped would be the public downfall of an HOA tyrant. The concession stand smelled of industrial-strength coffee and popcorn, adding to the sense that everyone had come to watch a heavyweight bout. Brenda arrived fashionably late in a glossy black SUV that screamed self-importance. She emerged flanked by what was left of her legal team, namely one visibly terrified attorney who looked like he'd rather be defending serial arsonists. She was dressed for war, a tailored power suit, designer heels tapping across the linoleum like a countdown clock. Rick, of course, was absent. Federal terrorism charges don't exactly come with bail privileges. Council Chairman Robert Hayes opened the meeting with the weary tone of a man who'd signed up to manage potholes and drainage budgets, not referee a local soap opera. "We're here tonight to discuss the Millbrook Lake water rights dispute," he began, "and we've invited representatives from the county attorney's office, the state environmental agency, and the Federal Water Management Bureau to offer official testimony." Brenda took the podium first, her trademark confident smile plastered on like armor. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "our community has been targeted by an elaborate fraud. One man's deception has disrupted our peace and corrupted multiple government agencies." What followed was a PowerPoint presentation that would have made a conspiracy theorist proud, complete with grainy charts, random arrows, and sweeping accusations. She claimed I had bribed federal agents, forged a century's worth of legal documents, and hacked county computer systems to create fake records. Then, for her grand finale, she jabbed a manicured finger in my direction. This man has exploited his wife's death to gain sympathy while stealing from this community under the guise of legitimacy. The audience stirred. Even Brenda's loyal supporters shifted uncomfortably, dragging Sarah's memory into her vendetta. Had crossed a line everyone recognized. Then came County Attorney Michelle Rodriguez, a woman whose presence alone could quiet a riot. Carrying a thick leather briefcase that could double as a blunt instrument, she approached the microphone with the patience of a teacher addressing an unruly class. "Mrs. Thornfield," she began evenly, "our office has completed a full investigation into Mr. Morrison's claims. Every document has been authenticated through federal archives, state historical registries, and county engineering records dating back to 1923. She opened the briefcase and presented her findings. Theodore Morrison's agreements were genuine. My inheritance had been legally executed. The county had been paying into the Morrison Water Trust for 70 years. Meanwhile, Brenda's HOA had operated without any lawful water rights authority since its inception. And furthermore, Rodriguez continued, Mrs. Thornfield has submitted 14 false reports to various agencies in the past month, wasting thousands in taxpayer funds and misusing federal resources. Her husband remains in federal custody, facing terrorism charges for attempting to sabotage protected flood control infrastructure. Next, EPA Inspector Sarah Delgado stepped up, a woman whose tone carried the weight of decades spent separating environmental science from nonsense. "I've personally inspected Mr. Morrison's water management system," she said. "It represents some of the finest private watershed maintenance in this entire region." Mrs. Thornfield's allegations of environmental danger are not only inaccurate, they are intentionally misleading. But the real finishing blow came from Dr. Lisa Morgan. Calm and methodical, she presented her watershed assessment with the confidence of someone who deals in hard data, not drama. "According to our analysis," she stated, "Theodore Morrison's flood control network has prevented approximately $47 million in downstream damage over the last 90 years. The system remains one of the most effective privately maintained water infrastructures in the state." She stated Mr. Morrison's continued oversight of this system is essential for maintaining regional flood safety. The HOA's interference has, in fact, endangered public welfare. When Chairman Hayes asked if I wanted to comment, I walked to the podium with a single manila folder in hand, and faced the silent crowd. The only sounds were the low hum of TV cameras and a nervous cough from the back. "Everyone," I began, "I never wanted any of this. My only goal was to honor my wife's memory by caring for the dock she helped design. But when Mrs. Thornfield turned my grief into a weapon and harassment into sport, I was left with no choice but to defend rights I didn't even know existed." I opened the folder, holding up the county's official recognition of my water management authority. "This isn't about revenge or control," I said firmly. "It's about duty. I inherited the responsibility to maintain the infrastructure that protects your homes from flooding, and I take that obligation seriously." The room exploded in applause so long and loud that the chairman had to restore order. Brenda sat motionless, her trademark smile extinguished like a candle caught in a hurricane. 6 months later, the transformation was so thorough it felt as though we'd stepped into a world where HOA letters actually served their residents rather than terrorized them. Rick was now serving 18 months in federal prison, learning that orange jumpsuits flatter no one and that good behavior doesn't erase terrorism charges. Brenda had sold her house at a loss and vanished, presumably to unleash her clipboard tyranny on some other unfortunate neighborhood several states away. Good riddance. Just 3 days after the town hall meeting, an emergency HOA election took place, a true moment of democracy in motion. Margaret Morgan won the presidency unanimously, bringing both legal expertise and radical new ideas, like treating neighbors with respect. Her first official action was a public apology to me, coupled with a promise that harassment will never again disguise itself as community standards. From there, the Millbrook Watershed Conservation Trust was born, a living testament that collaboration triumphs over corruption, using Theodore's $847,000 trust fund. Combined with matching federal grants, we upgraded the decades-old flood control network into a cutting-edge environmental protection system. Monitoring stations across 3 counties now use it as their benchmark for excellence. But the project that moves me most is the Sarah Morrison Memorial Environmental Learning Center, built exactly where Rick once tried to destroy our dock. Today, children learn about watershed ecology in the same place where my wife dreamed of watching the sunrise. Parents discover that education, not regulation, is the key to protecting nature. Sarah would have adored watching kids catch and release their first fish while learning the value of clean water and balanced ecosystems. Her spirit lives on in every child who realizes that environmental stewardship isn't about laws, it's about love and understanding. The Theodore Morrison Environmental Engineering Scholarship now awards $50,000 annually to students pursuing sustainability and water management careers. 3 recipients have already returned as professional interns, helping maintain the very systems their scholarships supported. Theodore's quiet brilliance continues to nurture the next generation of stewards. Property values have risen 23% since buyers realized they were investing in real environmental innovation, not HOA theatrics. Our neighborhood became a national model for how private rights and public benefit can coexist when guided by integrity instead of greed. Major outlets took notice. CNN featured our story in their Good News Friday segment, while the Wall Street Journal praised our public-private partnership model. I've even been invited to speak at water management conferences, though I still prefer my morning coffee to hotel buffets. Our annual Watershed Festival now draws more than 3,000 visitors each year, eager to see what happens when a community chooses unity over conflict. Local businesses flourish. Children learn the principles of sustainability, and homeowners understand the real meaning of property rights. Jake Morrison founded an ethical construction company focused on environmentally responsible waterfront projects. His business card proudly reads, "Quality work, fair prices, no corruption." A clear jab at Rick's former operation. His waitlist now stretches 6 months long. Proof that integrity never goes out of fashion. Every morning, I sit on Sarah's memorial dock, coffee steaming in the crisp air, as automated systems quietly safeguard thousands of homes. Great blue herons glide over crystal clear waters while ospreys nest in the platforms we built for wildlife. Sometimes, I tell Sarah about how her grief turned into something greater, how her dream became the foundation for a community reborn. I think she'd be proud to see that what began as loss grew into a legacy neither of us could have imagined. A living reminder that ordinary people can stand up to extraordinary bullies when they have patience, do their research, and refuse to back down. The lake no longer just holds water, it holds proof that communities thrive when leadership serves everyone, not personal ambition. That environmental preservation and property rights can strengthen one another. And that delayed justice isn't the same as denied justice. Theodore's craftsmanship still shields us from floods nearly a century later. Sarah's compassion continues to inspire young minds toward environmental awareness. And ironically, Brenda's harassment ended up sparking the most powerful water rights education movement our state has ever seen. Here's my challenge to you: check your property deed before believing any HOA's version of your rights. Share your own HOA horror stories in the comments. Together we can build a knowledge base that empowers homeowners to push back against clipboard bullies. And don't forget to subscribe to Karen's Stories for more real-life accounts of everyday people who refused to be intimidated and ended up transforming their communities. Tap that notification bell, because next week's episode features a neighbor who built a fence across my property without realizing I owned his entire driveway. The battle against petty tyrants never truly ends, but the satisfaction of seeing justice catch up to them makes it worth it. Thanks for tuning into HOA Stories. If this episode made you laugh, gasp, or roll your eyes at HOA insanity, hit that like button and share your thoughts below. We post new tales of HOA chaos and neighborhood drama every week, so stay subscribed to catch the next unbelievable story.